Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her tactical gear one final time as the Black Hawk helicopter thundered through the night sky over hostile territory. The rhythmic thumping of rotor blades mixed with the howling wind that rushed through the open cabin door. Below them stretched miles of dense jungle, dotted with enemy encampments that glowed like angry fireflies in the darkness. Sarah had spent the last 8 years proving herself in the male-dominated world of special operations. She started as a regular Army medic, but her exceptional marksmanship skills and tactical intelligence caught the attention of her commanding officers. After grueling months of selection processes, physical challenges that pushed her body beyond its limits, and psychological evaluations that tested her mental fortitude, she became one of only 12 women to ever join the elite Delta Force unit. Tonight's mission was unlike anything she had faced before. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist leader named Hassan al-Rashid was hiding in a heavily fortified compound deep in the mountains of Afghanistan. This wasn't just any terrorist. Al-Rashid was responsible for coordinating multiple attacks across Europe and was planning something catastrophic for American soil. The window to capture him was closing rapidly, as satellite imagery showed increased movement around the compound, suggesting he might flee at dawn. The original extraction plan had fallen apart when their primary landing zone was compromised by enemy patrols. Sarah's team of 6 elite soldiers now faced an impossible choice: abort the mission and let a dangerous terrorist escape, or attempt something that had never been tried before: a solo infiltration jump into the heart of enemy territory. As the helicopter approached the drop zone, Sarah could see the compound through her night vision goggles. It sat like a fortress on a rocky plateau, surrounded by armed guards, razor wire, and what appeared to be at least 50 hostile combatants. The intelligence briefing had mentioned guard towers, patrol routes, and sophisticated alarm systems. What it hadn't mentioned was the sheer cliff face that surrounded 3 sides of the compound, making traditional approach routes nearly impossible. Her team leader, Major Thompson, grabbed her shoulder and shouted over the engine noise. The original plan called for the entire team to rappel down together, but enemy anti-aircraft weapons had been spotted in the area. A full helicopter assault would be suicide. Sarah had volunteered for what everyone knew was essentially a one-way mission: infiltrate alone, gather critical intelligence about al-Rashid's location within the compound, and somehow survive long enough for extraction. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through her headset, informing her they were approaching the drop zone. Sarah checked her equipment one more time: silenced pistol, tactical knife, explosive charges, communication device, medical kit, and enough ammunition for a small war. Her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. This was what 8 years of training had prepared her for. Through the open door, she could see the compound growing larger. Guard towers swept searchlights across the perimeter, and she counted at least 20 armed sentries walking patrol routes. The helicopter would have only seconds over the drop zone before enemy forces would detect their presence and open fire. Sarah would need to jump, deploy her parachute, navigate through hostile airspace, and land silently within the compound walls, all while avoiding detection by dozens of trained killers. Major Thompson handed her a small device with a red button. If the mission went completely wrong, if capture seemed inevitable, this would ensure that critical military secrets died with her. Sarah clipped it to her vest, knowing she might need to use it. The helicopter began its final approach, flying low and fast to avoid radar detection. Below them, the compound's lights created an ominous glow against the mountain landscape. Sarah could make out individual buildings within the fortress-like structure: a main house where al-Rashid was likely hiding, several barracks for guards, weapons storage facilities, and what appeared to be a communications center bristling with antennas and satellite dishes. The pilot's voice cut through her thoughts, counting down the seconds to the drop zone. Sarah moved to the helicopter's edge, her boots hanging over empty space thousands of feet above hostile territory. Wind whipped at her face as she gripped the doorframe, muscles tensed for the leap that would either make military history or end her life. Her team members watched silently, knowing they might never see her again. In special operations, soldiers formed bonds stronger than family, and sending Sarah into that compound alone violated every principle of tactical teamwork. But sometimes, impossible missions required impossible choices. The pilot's final countdown echoed through her headset. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sarah released her grip and plunged into the darkness, her body cutting through the night air as the helicopter's engines faded above her. The compound rushed up to meet her, its lights growing brighter with each passing second. As she fell through the hostile sky, Sarah thought about her younger sister back home in Texas, who had no idea her big sister was currently falling toward what might be certain death in a foreign land. She thought about the intensive training that had brought her to this moment, the countless hours of preparation that would either save her life or prove insufficient against the overwhelming odds below. Her altimeter beeped, indicating it was time to deploy her parachute. Sarah pulled the ripcord, feeling the sudden jerk as the chute opened above her. Now came the most dangerous part, navigating through enemy airspace while suspended beneath a parachute that would make her visible to anyone looking up. The compound's perimeter grew clearer as she descended. She could see guards walking their routes, unaware that death was literally falling from the sky toward them. Sarah had memorized the guard schedules and patrol patterns, but intelligence reports could be wrong, outdated, or deliberately falsified. She would need to rely on her training, her instincts, and a considerable amount of luck to survive the next few hours. As her boots touched down silently in a shadowed corner of the compound, Sarah quickly gathered her parachute and hid it behind a storage building. She was now completely alone in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies who would torture and kill her without hesitation if discovered. The real mission was just beginning. Sarah crouched in the shadows behind the storage building, her heart hammering as she assessed her situation. The compound was larger than the satellite images had suggested, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways and hidden passages. Guard towers loomed at each corner, their searchlights sweeping methodically across the courtyard in overlapping patterns that left few blind spots. She activated her night vision equipment and began moving toward the main house where intelligence suggested al-Rashid was hiding. Every step had to be calculated, every movement precise. The guards she could see were professional soldiers, not the untrained militants often found in terrorist camps. They carried modern weapons, wore body armor, and moved with the discipline of experienced fighters. Her first obstacle came sooner than expected. Two guards emerged from a side building directly in her path, speaking in hushed Arabic as they walked toward her position. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, controlling her breathing as the men approached. One of them stopped just feet from her hiding spot, lighting a cigarette while his companion continued walking. For several agonizing minutes, Sarah remained motionless while the guard finished his smoke break. She could hear him breathing, could smell the tobacco, could have reached out and touched his weapon. One wrong move, one accidental sound, and the entire compound would be alerted to her presence. When the guard finally moved on, Sarah waited another full minute before continuing her advance. The main house sat at the compound's center, a two-story structure with balconies overlooking the courtyard. Light emanated from several windows on the upper floor, suggesting active occupancy. Sarah needed to get closer, but the approach was completely exposed. She studied the guard patterns for 10 minutes, timing their movements and identifying a brief window when the searchlights would create a shadow path to the building's base. When the opportunity came, Sarah sprinted across 30 yards of open ground in complete silence, her boots finding purchase on the rocky surface without creating a sound. She reached the main house and pressed against its stone wall, listening for activity inside. Through a ground floor window, she could hear voices speaking Arabic in urgent tones. Sarah carefully peered through the window and saw 4 men gathered around a table covered with maps and documents. She recognized 2 faces from intelligence briefings, mid-level commanders in al-Rashid's organization. But the terrorist leader himself wasn't visible. She needed to get inside and search the upper floors. The building's rear entrance was guarded by a single sentry who was clearly struggling to stay awake during the late-night shift. Sarah approached from his blind side, moving with the fluid grace that years of training had ingrained in her muscle memory. When she was close enough, she struck with surgical precision, a sleeper hold that rendered the guard unconscious without killing him or creating any noise that might alert his companions. Sarah dragged the unconscious guard into the shadows and took his radio and access card. The card would give her entry to the building, while monitoring the radio would provide intelligence about guard movements and any security alerts. She slipped through the rear door and found herself in a narrow hallway that led toward the voices she had heard earlier. The interior of the building revealed the terrorist organization's sophisticated operation. Computer equipment, communications gear, and weapons were stored throughout the first floor. Sarah photographed everything with a miniature camera designed for covert operations, gathering intelligence that could prove valuable even if the primary mission failed. She located a staircase leading to the upper floors, but heard footsteps approaching from the main room. Sarah quickly ducked into a storage closet as 2 armed men walked past, discussing security arrangements in Arabic. From their conversation, she learned that al-Rashid was indeed in the building, occupying a secured room on the 2nd floor. When the men passed, Sarah emerged and began climbing the stairs. Each step had to be tested carefully to avoid creaking boards that might betray her presence. The 2nd floor was darker than the 1st, with only emergency lighting providing minimal visibility. She counted 4 doors along the main hallway, but had no way of knowing which room contained her target. Sarah decided to investigate systematically, starting with the door that showed light underneath. She pressed her ear against the wood and heard the sound of someone typing on a keyboard. Very carefully, she tried the handle and found it unlocked. The door opened to reveal a small office where a young man was working at a computer, his back to the entrance. Moving like a shadow, Sarah approached from behind and placed her hand over the man's mouth while pressing her knife to his throat. In Arabic, she whispered questions about al-Rashid's location. The terrified operative pointed toward the room at the hall's end before Sarah rendered him unconscious with a pressure point technique that would keep him quiet for hours. The target room's door was reinforced with additional locks and appeared to have electronic security systems. Sarah examined the setup and realized that forcing entry would trigger alarms throughout the compound. She needed a different approach. Remembering her training in unconventional infiltration, she decided to try the balcony. Sarah made her way to an empty room with balcony access and climbed outside. The mountain air was crisp and thin, and she was now exposed to the guard towers below. Moving carefully along the building's exterior ledge, she approached what she hoped was al-Rashid's room from outside. Through the balcony door's glass, she could see into a luxurious bedroom where a bearded man in his 50s was speaking on a satellite phone. Sarah's pulse quickened as she recognized Hassan al-Rashid from countless intelligence photographs. The terrorist leader was alive, unaware that one of America's most elite soldiers was watching him from just a few feet away. But capturing al-Rashid alive would be impossible without backup, and calling for extraction would take hours. Sarah realized she was facing the most difficult decision of her military career. Her mission was to gather intelligence and confirm the target's location, but she now had an opportunity to eliminate one of the world's most dangerous terrorists. As she watched through the glass, al-Rashid ended his phone conversation and moved toward a desk covered with documents. Sarah could see maps of American cities, photographs of potential targets, and what appeared to be operational plans for a major terrorist attack. The intelligence value of those documents could save thousands of lives. Sarah checked her watch and realized she had been inside the compound for over an hour. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the likelihood that her presence would be discovered. She needed to make a choice: attempt to capture al-Rashid and the intelligence, or extract immediately while she still had the advantage of darkness and surprise. The radio she had taken from the guard suddenly crackled to life. Voices in Arabic reported that the unconscious sentry had been discovered. The compound was going on high alert, and guards were beginning a systematic search of every building. Sarah's window of opportunity was rapidly closing. She could hear boots on stairs, voices calling out search patterns, and the sound of weapons being readied for combat. In minutes, possibly seconds, her position would be compromised. Al-Rashid was still in the room just beyond the balcony door, unaware that his carefully constructed sanctuary was about to become a battlefield. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't leave without completing the mission that had brought her this far. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to do what Special Forces soldiers do best: accomplish the impossible against overwhelming odds. Sarah burst through the balcony door in one explosive motion, her weapon trained on al-Rashid before he could react. The terrorist leader spun around, his eyes widening in shock at seeing an American soldier materialize in his supposedly secure sanctuary. For a split second, neither moved, the weight of the moment hanging between them like a loaded weapon. Al-Rashid's hand moved toward a pistol on his desk, but Sarah was faster. Her training kicked in automatically, muscle memory taking over as she closed the distance between them. She struck with precision, disarming him before he could reach his weapon, then forced him to the ground with a combat technique that left him conscious but completely controlled. The sounds of searching guards grew louder in the hallway outside. Sarah knew she had perhaps minutes before the room would be discovered. She quickly gathered the documents from al-Rashid's desk, stuffing maps and operational plans into her tactical pack while keeping her weapon trained on the terrorist leader. What she saw in those papers confirmed her worst fears. Al-Rashid was planning simultaneous attacks on American schools, shopping centers, and government buildings. Al-Rashid spoke for the first time, his English surprisingly clear. He told her that killing him would accomplish nothing, that his organization had cells throughout America that would continue their work regardless. Sarah ignored his psychological warfare, focusing instead on the immediate tactical situation. The hallway outside had grown quiet, which meant the guards were conducting a methodical room-by-room search. Sarah activated her communication device and whispered coordinates to her extraction team. The response crackled through her earpiece. The helicopter was still 40 minutes away, and enemy anti-aircraft weapons were tracking its approach. She was on her own for at least another hour, trapped in hostile territory with the world's most wanted terrorist as her prisoner. The door handle rattled as someone tested it from outside. Sarah had seconds to react. She forced al-Rashid into the room's bathroom, a small space with no windows that would provide concealment and limit her defensive angles. As the main door burst open, 3 armed guards rushed into the bedroom, weapons ready. Sarah waited until all 3 men were inside before engaging. Her first shot dropped the lead guard silently, while her second took down the man behind him before he could raise his weapon. The third guard managed to fire a burst from his automatic rifle, but Sarah had already moved, using the furniture for cover while putting 2 rounds center mass. The gunfire had eliminated any hope of stealth. Within seconds, the compound erupted in activity. Boots thundered on stairs, voices shouted orders, and weapons were being readied throughout the building. Sarah estimated at least 30 hostile combatants were now converging on her position. Al-Rashid tried to negotiate from the bathroom, offering her safe passage in exchange for his freedom. Sarah knew better than to trust a terrorist's promises, but she also knew her tactical situation was becoming impossible. She was outnumbered, surrounded, and running low on ammunition. Even if she could hold her position, the extraction helicopter might not survive the anti-aircraft defenses. Sarah made a decision that would later become legendary in special operations circles. Instead of trying to defend a static position, she would go on the offensive. Using al-Rashid as a human shield, she kicked open the bedroom door and began fighting her way through the building toward the compound's communication center. Her plan was audacious and desperate. If she could reach the communications equipment, she could call in airstrikes on the compound while simultaneously transmitting the intelligence she had gathered. It would likely mean her death, but it would also ensure that al-Rashid's terrorist network was destroyed and his planned attacks prevented. The fighting through the hallway was intense and close quarters. Sarah moved with fluid precision, using her hostage to prevent the guards from getting clear shots while returning fire with devastating accuracy. Her Special Forces training had prepared her for exactly this type of running firefight, and she demonstrated why only the most elite soldiers earn their way into Delta Force. 3 guards went down in the first hallway, their bodies providing cover as Sarah advanced toward the stairs. Al-Rashid struggled against her grip, but she maintained control while engaging multiple targets simultaneously. A guard on the staircase managed to wing her left shoulder with a lucky shot, but Sarah continued moving, adrenaline masking the pain. The communications center was on the first floor, in a room she had identified during her initial infiltration. Sarah fought her way down the stairs, using grenades to clear concentrations of enemy fighters while preserving her ammunition for the final push. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed throughout the compound as reinforcements poured in from external guard positions. When Sarah reached the communications center, she found it defended by 5 of al-Rashid's best fighters. These weren't ordinary guards. They were trained operators who had been specifically assigned to protect the terrorist leader's most critical assets. Sarah realized she was facing soldiers whose skills might match her own. The firefight in the communications center lasted only minutes, but felt like hours. Sarah used every piece of furniture, every doorway, every shadow as cover, while engaging targets who knew the room's layout better than she did. Al-Rashid continued to serve as her human shield, but his presence also limited her movement options and prevented her from using some of her remaining explosives. One by one, the defending guards fell to Sarah's superior training and tactical awareness. Her ammunition was running critically low when she finally reached the main communications console. With al-Rashid held at gunpoint beside her, she began transmitting the intelligence she had gathered along with coordinates for airstrikes on the compound. As she worked the radio, Sarah could hear helicopters approaching in the distance. But instead of rescue, these were enemy aircraft coming to reinforce the compound's defenses. Her extraction team was still minutes away, and she was about to face an even more overwhelming tactical disadvantage. Al-Rashid made one final attempt to escape, trying to break free while Sarah was focused on the radio transmission. But she had anticipated this move, and her response was swift and final. The terrorist leader who had planned to kill thousands of innocent Americans would never threaten anyone again. Sarah completed her transmission just as the enemy helicopters arrived overhead. Through the communications center's windows, she could see armed men rappelling into the compound courtyard. Her situation was now completely hopeless from a tactical standpoint, but she had accomplished her mission objectives and potentially saved countless lives. The sound of familiar rotors cut through the chaos outside. Sarah's extraction team had arrived, but they were flying into a heavily defended position against overwhelming odds. Through her headset, she heard Major Thompson's voice ordering her to reach the extraction point in the compound's center courtyard. What happened next would become part of Special Operations legend. Sarah fought her way out of the communications center, through dozens of enemy fighters, across the compound's killing fields, and reached the extraction helicopter just as it touched down. Her teammates provided covering fire while she ran through a gauntlet of automatic weapons, grenades, and rocket-propelled grenades. She dove into the helicopter's cabin as rounds sparked off the aircraft's armor plating. The pilot immediately lifted off, climbing rapidly to escape the effective range of ground-based weapons. As they gained altitude, Sarah looked back at the compound that had nearly become her tomb. Within hours, American airstrikes would destroy the compound and eliminate the remaining terrorist cells based on the intelligence she had gathered. Al-Rashid's planned attacks on American soil were permanently prevented, and his organization was effectively destroyed. Sarah's mission proved that Special Forces soldiers, regardless of gender, could accomplish the impossible when properly trained, equipped, and motivated. Her leap from that helicopter into enemy territory had saved thousands of innocent lives and demonstrated the extraordinary capabilities of America's elite military units. The scar on her shoulder would serve as a permanent reminder of the night she proved what Special Forces can do when facing impossible odds in defense of their country.